as we said, we broke the topic of additionality and permanence. We addressed additionality before lunch. Now we are going to discuss permanence. I think we already hinted some discussion items from previous discussion, especially when TGO was explaining the process, what they went through. So talking about all the information that was required from ICAO in terms of additionality, also related to permanence, the same from Guyana experience. And now let's go more formally through the topic. So Sandeep will walk us through. And then we will, if I remember well, I'm talking from the top of my head, Bursa Malaysia is going to be very kind and also take the floor and present the developments in Malaysia and probably, let's say, trigger some discussions around it. So Sandeep, please.
Thank you. In terms of the eligibility criteria which are coming from CORSIA or the offset credits, apart from additionality, one of the key criteria is also related to permanence. And the definition as has been provided for permanence is that they should not be a reversal of the emissions, because these are being used as offsets. Since they are being used as offsets, presuming that corresponding emissions are not happening. So it is very important that these credits which are being used for offsetting purpose do not come back into the atmosphere, and this is in context of be it the nature-based credits or the tech-based credits. So if we see it from a practical example, a simple example, if we open up a Coke bottle or a carbonated drink for that matter, the CO2 gets released into the atmosphere, which is there in that Coke or the carbonated drink. So from a emission reduction perspective, what it says is that whatsoever emission reduction that you are doing, like if it is planting a tree itself, which is sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, that tree needs to remain there for a long time or a long term, and it shouldn't be that you have that tree say for like 10 years, and that after 10 years you cut that tree, or some because of some infestation or some because of fire, that CO2 which has been sequestered is going back to the atmosphere. So to address this issue, there are certain other mechanisms which have been put in place, but from the permanence perspective, few key things which are there is that there is, as of now, there is some time horizon which has been defined, like should it be 20 years, 40 years, or 100 years. So 100 years is the commonly accepted choice across policy instruments when we see it from a permanence part, that at least it should be there for 100 years. But then there are other ways in which the permanence is also defined, or the crediting itself is given in not just tons but ton years to address this issue of permanence. So there are two things. There could be in the carbon market, like we know that certain type of activities, and especially for removal activities, uh, there are possibilities which may not be in our control, and which could, so there could be an intentional effort, and which can be captured, but there could be some unintentional or natural disasters which could result in the CO2 which has been removed from the atmosphere coming back into the into the atmospheric pool, into the atmosphere. So, what are the possible means and solutions which can be applied to address this permanence, noting that it is very important in the offsetting criteria. If it was not for offsetting, and if it was just for result based payment or the likewise, perhaps it would not have made that big a difference. But since these credits are being used by airlines as a proxy or for offsetting their emissions, it is very important that these credits uh, are there for or are valid for a certain period of time, a longer period of time. So, to address this issue or this risk of permanence, the different ways in which it has been thought of. There was earlier the reference to insurance products being made available, whereby the compensation could happen, or the other market players can come into place to compensate for this, the credits or the emissions coming back into the atmosphere. There is also the concept of creating a buffer pool to address the risk of permanence. So, in certain, so there are, like, if we see it from a stepwise approach, as a first step, the risks which are associated with the permanence of the credit are being assessed, and based on that, the the buffer pool is created, or insurance products are being referred. So they could, and what should be the buffer is also something which either is foretold by the programs, that yes, you have to have this much of buffer for a type of project, or it could be based on the risk profile of the type of activity as well. But even, like what they say, that okay, the risk mitigation is what, like, whether uh, we could as well have some proactive measures as well. So, to to say in that sense, to address this permanence issue, especially for the community based or the nature based project, involvement of the community is very important, to ensure that okay, if we are talking about a community which is relying on a particular land area, and where the removal activity is happening, that they do not sort of do the deforestation, or if they are involved in the protection of that, then they are simplistic, but if they are compensated or incentivized or paid to ensure that the trees stand over there, is also one way, a proactive measure in terms of ensuring that the risks are kind of reduced. And there could be the long term arrangements or contracts. So if we are talking about land rights, and if some activity is being done on that land, uh, preferably if there are long term rights to that, then that would also ensure that the entity who is doing an activity on that land continues to ensure that that land has the vegetation or has the plantation on that land, and is not cut off from that. So that sort of arrangement is also there. uh, it could also be based on the payments which are being made, which are linked to it. And we saw that in the case of Guyana, that the amount which they were anticipating, $250 million, eventually they got somewhere $220 million, because to some extent it was linked to the payment, the performance basically, and some bit of deforestation that might have happened resulted in the reduction of what they got. And then there are the enhanced MRV systems also to ensure that uh, this could be seen in terms of, say, wildfires for that matter. So, how effectively you are able to capture those wildfires and address the issue of it not impacting the carbon stock which you have there. Then there are other regulatory safeguards and other measures from the domestic side which could be put in place apart from the buffer reserves which are there. Insurance mechanisms are also there as as sort of the last step thing in case it is still becomes a reality that the carbon stock is lost for some reasons, then that gets compensated. So these are some of the ways in which permanence could be addressed, or the risk of non-permanence is getting addressed in the carbon markets, and it is more important in case of nature-based project to some extent. And if we see uh, nature-based project, because they are linked to a particular land area, and land rights may not be necessarily with the project implementer or the project developer, or the land rights might be for a limited period of time. So that links to the ownership and the rights of these environmental attributes, whether they are associated with a particular entity. And if the government so decides to, say, build a road for economic reasons or otherwise, they they can take the land, and then uh, the stock which was standing there uh, will have will get removed. So especially for nature based project, it is even more important that how the regulations in terms of land rights, in terms of the government interventions which could happen in that area uh, get impacted, and that also links to the geological storage also in certain circumstances, like whether the government kind of allows it or not, and if there are other interventions which the government would want to do in such sort of storage wells. So from a CORSIA perspective, they said that this is important because it is being used for offsetting purpose, and since it is being used for offsetting purpose, so uh, in the pilot phase, essentially many of the GHG programs which had the uh, the project, the removal projects or credits which were there, they were essentially excluded for this reasons that the permanence risk was very high. It was not getting addressed. This permanence linked to reversal of carbon in the atmosphere was very high, and that being the reason that these methodologies itself were excluded. And with that, so even if you approve a certain program but you exclude a particular set of methodology in that program, so a project which has been developed under an approved program but not an approved methodology will automatically become ineligible for CORSIA compliance. So, uh, so the in the pilot phase, many of these removal projects for the reason of permanence not being addressed were kind of excluded, and unless until there is a full compensation measure which is there in place, that is what will allow them to be eligible under CORSIA. So in the first phase, as we see, the set of programs which have been approved and wherein conditional approval has been provided, there are certain changes which are getting reflected. So if we see from a particular program perspective, if we see from gold standard, where there are afforestation, reforestation projects or agriculture projects which have a bearing on soil organic carbon, there is high possibility that these removals which are happening, be it in the tree, in the biomass stock, or in the soil, uh, can get released back to the atmosphere. So this removal or this risk which is associated with such sort of activities and the credits not being permanent is very high. And what are the mechanisms in place to ensure that even though this risk is high, it is being addressed? So that is being addressed through the understanding of that risk, first of all, and through that understanding of the risk, the buffer credits are being put in place under the program. So if a project is, suppose, removing 100 credits, then all of these 100 credits are not what are being credited, but a certain part of it, say like 10%, 20%, depending upon the risk of the project, are kept in the buffer pool. So only 80 credits get issued to that project. So that's one of the mechanism by which many of the standards and the associated methodologies are addressing the risk of permanence. And in case, because there is a continuous monitoring, reporting, and verification, periodic interval. So and this buffer is getting created for every period. So in case in a certain period it is observed that there has been some reversal, then it gets compensated through this buffer pool. So that's very important to understand that from uh, a nature-based project or a removal project, to be precise, there could be high possibility of uh, credit under delivery because of the permanence issue, as one of the inference which can be drawn from this whole thing. In case of VCS also, there has been the similar sort of approach, where um, uh, acknowledging that under VCS the type of activities are even more. So it's not just the afforestation, reforestation, or soil organic or the agriculture project, but they also have the jurisdictional projects, the with the nested red plus activity, similar as the case of Guyana. So, but the difference over here is, although both are nature-based projects, so if we talk about nature-based project, here we have, say, like afforestation, reforestation, or a red plus activity. Both are nature-based, but there is a distinction here that on one hand, say for an afforestation project, you are planting trees, so the removal is happening. Whereas for a red plus project, the tree is already there and you are ensuring that the tree remains there. So it's a avoidance activity. And that's the difference, that from a permanence point of view, if you see it, whereas for a tree plantation, the removals are happening over a period of time. And if the tree is cut or burnt, then that CO2 goes back to the atmosphere. So the credits are being given for the removal of CO2. Whereas for a red plus activity, the tree is there 2021, 2022, 2023, and you get credit for the tree being there for 2021, 2022, 2023. Now in 2024, if you cut that tree, you do not get the credit. So that's the very simplistic differentiation in terms of the uh, removal and avoidance type of project in the nature based space. So the in case of Vera, since it covers this jurisdictional RED plus activity also, so the the definition is even different as what was there in gold standard, like in terms of if there are loss events which leads to this emissions going back, and if that emits more than 5%, because that 5% is what they have kept as the buffer. So if that buffer is crossed, then essentially you will get negative credits, or you'll have to compensate for that. So they have a risk assessment tool which they have developed, and based on that risk assessment tool, the which looks into the project with a 100-year horizon. So here for removal projects, it's important that you are not looking into the emission reductions as is, but you are looking it over a time period that it would be there. uh, so here the permanent thing is not like a permanent thing, but it is at least ensuring a certain period, in this case 100 years. And in case of uh, uh, the loss which is happening, it getting compensated from the buffer pool, and if it is more than the buffer pool, then the negative credits will have to be compensated in a way or the other, like in future instances, or through compensation measures through insurance and all. So it is also to be seen from the perspective of who has the liability or the transfer of liability in this case. So an airline operator who has bought credit, Vera credit, now from a program approval perspective, Monica said earlier that it is, so if there are reversal, then it is up to the program to compensate. Now the program passes it on to the project developer. The project developer passes it on to the insurance company. So that's the sort of chain which is sort of help. So we come together to kind of work and make the system work, because otherwise if it is just put up on one entity, they would not have the bandwidth, or they would not have the capacity to do it, or the whole system might be seen collapsing. So if I give it from a different viewpoint, the auditing agencies who audit these projects, they the programs pass on this to the auditing agency that you did not do your job well, and you'll have to pay for this. So the auditing agencies also have an underlying insurance for covering themselves for such sort of eventualities, which is what is again looked by the accreditation agencies, that are you safeguarding yourself apart from the safeguarding of the projects and all. So everything is kind of sort of ring fence to some extent or the other. Then there is another concept of leakage, which can be seen more in context of the jurisdictional activities, the RED plus activities, because uh, uh, or rather it is partly getting addressed with the RED plus activities. Like if in the country there is a RED plus activity, and there is a separate project also which is happening in the country, so then there is overlapping area for that. Or to put it simply, let me put a simple example. I do a forestry activity, say in this room. I plant trees in this room. I say that, okay, I'm planting trees. you give me credits for this bit of activity. But and no deforestation or no cutting of trees would happen in this very area. But the people who are residing here, they might go out and then cut trees out from there. So although from this area I am getting credits, but with that limited site, I am not able to see that there is some bit of deforestation happening outside this area, which is kind of scavenging on the credits which could be made available from this activity. So leakage is a concept when in your project boundary, in your area, the set of activities that you are doing, you could be doing good and there are emission reductions happening within this boundary. But if it has an impact outside the boundary, then that is what you have to also address and take into account. In a different example, if I were to put this, if I am using, say, like uh, biomass in my boiler, I have an industrial facility. I am Earlier I was burning coal. Now I have shifted from coal to using biomass. I am using biomass and this is being burnt in my boiler, and I am claiming credits for shifting from fossil fuel to a renewable biomass. But so if I look at from purely from my project boundary, from my industry perspective, I am resulting in emission reductions. But this biomass which I am sourcing, if that same biomass was being used by other people and they now shift back to coal because they are not getting the biomass for some reason, or it is not in surplus and so they are shifting to coal or some other fossil fuel, then it's an issue that here I am getting credit, but they have resulted in more emissions somewhere else. So that is something which is a leakage, which will have to be deducted from this whole thing. So leakage as a concept is emissions which are happening outside the project boundary. Now the leakage could be a positive leakage or a negative leakage also. So it's not necessarily that it has to be a positive leakage or resulting in deduction, but it could be that seeing me, probably other industries also start to use or shift to biomass which was earlier not being used. So there could be a positive leakage in that sense as well. But in certain projects, this could be a major issue. So coming back to the nature based type of project, it is very important that activities which are done, forestry activities which are done, should not kind of, like, if certain area was converted from agriculture land to forest land, but at the same time the adjacent land was deforested, uh, is what gets captured in the leakage assessment part of the so this the leakage is generally a part of the methodology itself. So the methodologies will generally give reference to, okay, you need to look into this, but there could be possibility that there are certain scenarios which have not been envisaged or which have not been known, so they are not getting reflected in the methodology. So it's the project developer's responsibility and then the auditor's responsibility to look into it and flag it and address it, so that at a later date it doesn't come as a surprise, as a shock, and leads to bad press or the credit not being made eligible subsequently. So that's I think all from this side of the presentation. Over to you, Santi, on this.
So I see we have a few questions. One related to the additionality, and another one related to the leakages. I think we should get them, although I have the feeling that they were very specific to a certain moment in the different presentations that we have had. So it says, would an additionality then be managed at a methodology level?
There is a session later. Do you want to address during the methodology part?
Yeah, can, but this bit yes is the answer. Additionality is part of the methodology.
I like this, questions and answers. Especially after lunch, it's very welcome. Jokes aside. It's the next one is on leakages. So how do you manage leakages at national level, at national scale? I'm not sure if this is coming for. It was for Guyana. So then we take it for tomorrow. Although I don't know if TGO or yourself want to comment on that. That's also if it's relevant for you or.
At the jurisdictional level, so this question is, since it's talking about national level, so it's talking about the jurisdictional level, RED plus kind of activity. And the RED plus methodology is similar to the additionality being part of the methodology. For RED plus or the jurisdictional projects, also leakage, as I said, is part of the methodology itself, which is spells out how you have to address it.
Very good. Any question from the room or from the virtual room? Please.
Just a curiosity regarding the permanence. If in the case, for example, in the case of the CCS, because the technology is new, then we don't know whether it will last. The storage will be safe for like 100 years. Then you said like, then in that case, perhaps we have to be insured. Is it mean that the insurance have to cover the at the 100-year period as you mentioned? Is that going to be very expensive? What is in practical level?
So there are two parts to it. One, there is a credit transfer which is happening, and the second is which is being used as offset. Second, there is a monetary transfer as well. So the insurance, whether it is a uh, monetary based, then it does not address the underlying offsetting aspect which was supposed to happen, unless until there is a sort of a penalty mechanism for not meeting targets or likewise, which is currently not there. So taking a step back, carbon capture and storage or carbon capture usage and storage, different sort of technologies, measures, and these different activities have got a different sort of profile in terms of reversals. So if we talk about carbon capture in and concrete curing as an example, or putting up this CO2 into geological storage and all, so once it is put in, okay, unless until there is some natural disaster or something, or somebody doesn't go about drilling into it, it is not expected to be released and would be there for ages, like oil and coal, and unless until I go about drilling or mining it, it would be there. So the permanence thing in uh, the tech based or CCUS projects is different, and the methodologies for these are, there are a few methodologies which are there, but many of the methodologies for different sort of interventions are still being developed, wherein this aspect of permanence is being captured in it. And as I said, that we are looking into 100-year window uh, for for all reasons, because even if we see from the global warming potential perspective, it is being pegged to 100-year period. So methane, 100-year period uh, would have a warming potential as per year 5 as 28. So so that's the period that we are looking at. Not Nobody is here for eternity. So yeah, that's the short answer.
Thank you very much. So I think we can then move on to the presentation from Bursa Malaysia. Dr. Wei, tell us if you need support or you can directly share from your WebEx connection. Perfect.
Can you let me know if you can see my screen?
I think we can
Yeah,
all see,
you
yes?
can see
Now
it
in
great.
presentation mode.
Okay,
Perfect.
that's great. Yeah, I think first of all, thank you very much that it is really quite impromptu. I'm actually, Busa is not in the agenda, but thank you for this invitation. So what we are going to share is really as Malaysia takes over the chairmanship of ASEAN in 2025, which is next year. There are two initiatives that we have actually moved up together with the ASEAN Business Advisory Council of Malaysia. The first one is the ASEAN Common.
Sorry, Dr. Wei,
Yes.
can you just mute your on your laptop? Mute the speaker.
Mute my laptop. Yeah,
Thank you.
just a minute. I think it's muted already. Just
It might be the having the speaker behind you. So maybe for the presentation, you come to the stage, you come here to the front, because I think it's having the mic close to the
I see.
speaker behind that is interfering. So you sit here.
Okay.
Everybody leaving now.
I move here. This one. No more echo? Okay, that's great. Yeah. So just let me minimize the screen. Okay, right. So two things that we have actually initiated. One is the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework, and the other is the Malaysia Carbon Market Association. So if you could go on to this next slide, basically the first part of it I wanted to explain is the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework. And before I move on to the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework, I'd like to actually explain that when Indonesia took over the chairmanship of ASEAN in 2023, they actually endorsed the ASEAN strategy for the carbon neutrality. And if you look at the ASEAN strategy for the carbon neutrality, there are actually 8 strategies under this particular neutrality. And the first one is actually that are related to the carbon market. One is on the interoperable carbon market. And just want to minimize the screen here. And the second one that would be related to the credible and carbon standards relating to the carbon credits. So item number 4 here, strategy 4 here relates to the demand, enlarging the demand when you have an interoperable carbon market. And when you have a common standard, you can also facilitate the supplies. Just want to move on to the next. So therefore, the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework is seen as a framework to operationalize the ASEAN strategy for carbon neutrality. And in particular, this is not just unlocking the issues that we believe face in Malaysia. You know, in our discussion with TGO, and thank you very much to TGO for their generosity in terms of their resources with Malaysia. We found that when we have our own national standards, we can further unlock technical opportunities that are very unique within our own country, within our own region. Secondly, the key thing is, of course, to keep the cost of the implementing the projects lower. When you have your own national crediting scheme, the fees of registering projects, issuance, and retirement is really within your own national control. Thirdly is, of course, it provides an alternate carbon standards in addition to the current independent standards. Now, we do know that currently independent standards like VERA, they have gone through some very tough times in the last 18 months. There has been scrutiny to the standards, and of course, this scrutiny has really bring down the confidence of an NGO-backed standards. But this is where we hope that when the government is backing a national standard, then it will be a lot more credible. And of course, aside from addressing and facilitating the supply side, the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework wants to look at how we can increase the interoperability of the carbon market. So these are the key design elements that we look at when it is under the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework. The first thing is that it needs to have a localized methodologies that will unlock all these unique opportunities, methodologies that are also spanning both the nature and the tech base. So this is where Bursa Malaysia, we have a few conversations with the NRES. We think that the MFF is doing a great job in mooting up the nature-based part of the carbon projects, but where we would like to see NRES hopefully putting an equal priority is also the tech-based. And in particular, yesterday, Monica and I, we went through Gold Standard Impact Registry, and it was actually quite surprisingly that under the pilot scheme, we couldn't find any nature-based, projects. And just to share with you that Bursa, we have just actually auctioned the first of the Malaysian carbon credits, and it is a Kwamut project. The Kwamut project we were told by Permian Global, unfortunately, the project developer is not here today. It took almost 13 years from inception to the time whereby they actually sold their first fruits. But today, Nisa is here. She is developing their own, tech-based projects, and they registered, I think, March of last year, and accordingly, they could be even issuing the credits by end of this year. So anyway, a balanced portfolio is what we are looking for, in particular for meeting the CORSIA, which is just round the corner. 2027 is just round the corner. And the other part of it is, of course, high quality carbon credits. Importantly, we like the strategy of TGO having both a premium as well as a standard TIVA because it meets various carbon market requirements. But it doesn't mean that we do not allow independent standards to coexist. We believe always that choices must be given because this is where your markets are. But where the national standard could be, it could be actually harvesting those opportunities that are of lower abatement costs and therefore making it affordable for the national purpose. Now, how are we going to facilitate this? TGO and also, of course, in Indonesia, they have their own SRN. They have years of head start, which, of course, Malaysia is now trying to catch up game. And we understand that Vietnam, I think they are also trying to develop their own national scheme. Therefore, two areas of pain point that the industries have informed us. One is the methodology development. It has not been easy. Second part of it is the VVB, the verification and validation body. These experts take time to actually develop in terms of the skill. So under the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework, potentially what we could do is that if you could mutually recognize each another's methodologies, so therefore you do not reinvent the wheel. Most likely what is practicable and doable in our neighboring countries could also be doable within our own country. So that would be the first part of it. And when you do a mutual recognition, essentially you are harmonizing the methodologies. Now we have come to accept, Sandeep talked about the, scenario 3 in the registry. We have come to accept that to have an ASEAN standard might be a tall order. What would be probably more practicable is that we all have our own national standard, but we harmonize it through the methodology level and also by having a shared pool in terms of the common resources, for example, the VVB, we could accelerate carbon projects within this particular region. Now, these are all on the demand side. These are all on the supply side. On the demand side, we will look at first part of it is how can we improve the linkages or the interoperability of the carbon markets. So actually yesterday I left the meeting a bit earlier at 5 o'clock to have a call with CIX. CIX is a carbon exchange in Singapore. Even among exchanges, we are always talking about how we can actually enlarge our markets through this kind of integration. Yeah. So in terms of the next thing, in terms of the carbon market framework, so the carbon market framework, the main gist would be really the first part of it through the mutual recognition of methodologies. Second part of it would be through the sharing of the talent pool of resources, especially VVBs, carbon consultants. The third part of it would be in terms of capacity building. We do realize that among ASEAN countries, there are a few countries, like for example, Indonesia and Thailand, they are already very advanced, especially in the carbon markets. And Malaysia, of course, we're still trying to play a catch-up game. And this is where we could have a lot of cross-border learning from our neighbors. And of course, fourthly, on the business collaboration. The ones that are, even though the government will issue the letter of authorization, the ones that will actually be implementing projects are really the private entities. So that's where a lot of cross-pollination in terms of the business collaborations would be very helpful among the ASEAN region if you want to facilitate more of these projects to come on board. In fact, we have been having a discussion with Indonesia's IDCTA. Their key interest is really to see how we can also expand opportunities to also invest in other projects outside of Indonesia, having a very deep experiences themselves. Finally, of course, is linkages of the carbon market mechanism, starting maybe from the voluntary carbon markets, then moving over to the national ETS. So on the right, the picture here, you can see that actually our minister, the Minister of the Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability, he has been really promoting and advocating about the ASEAN carbon framework. So in earlier part of June, together with the MFF and Bursa Malaysia, we accompanied the minister to visit the counterpart of the Thai ministry. And this is where they've mooted up the idea of an ASEAN carbon framework. And hopefully this particular framework can be driven from the commercial sector jointly together with the government. So specifically mentioned by YB Nick Nasmi here that Bursa together with MFF and of course the ASEAN Business Advisory Council could look into driving this as Malaysia takes over the ASEAN chairmanship. And of course, YB Nick Nasmi, the minister, he also socialized this idea with the Singapore counterpart. Singapore being very strategic in a sense that they are going to be a very big buyer of the carbon credits, especially having signed several of the Article 6 MOUs. So in this particular slide, this is an example of BCS standards, whereby these are the four components under their various standards. And the areas of bottleneck that we want to highlight is actually the item number 2, which is with regards to the methodologies, and number 3, which is with regards to the independent auditing. Now, this particular slide shows a very high level roadmap. And the way we look at this particular roadmap would be the first phase of it would be really to focus on developing more carbon projects. That would be really very critical in view of, especially of course, CORSIA is already immediately needing it by 2027, but of course also meeting both the compliance as well as the voluntary needs. Then the way we look at it is that in the phase 2 of it, we will look at how market would start to link among themselves in the voluntary space. And then of course, the final part of it is linkages among the ETS in the region. We know that of course, Indonesia has already implemented the ETS, and Thailand is already, this morning we saw in their climate change bill, I think they've crafted in their ETS mechanism as well. Malaysia, I think through the World Bank partnership for the market implementation, they are still making a decision between whether it is going to be carbon tax or ETS. But Vietnam, I was told that they have already started developing their ETS mechanism. And I think I'm moving on very quickly now to the Carbon Market Association. And the Market Association is, of course, very new. In fact, it actually was registered on the 3rd of July, and on the 8th of August, which is a month ago, it was launched at Bursa's Malaysia Carbon Market Association. And today I'm very pleased to inform that Nisa, she's in the room here, she is a very hardworking secretary, and she is also sitting as chair of the subcommittee driving the tech-based projects. And here are our vision and mission, and you will receive these slides later, and it's also available on our website, so I will not go through these details. But the important thing that we want to highlight is that by COP29 this year, we plan to sign some memorandum of collaboration with other ASEAN Carbon Market Associations, for example, the ones, the likes that are in Indonesia, in Thailand, and yesterday evening we were speaking to Singapore. So if the four countries could initiate first this particular memorandum of collaboration, of course, we also welcome other ASEAN countries to join in the collaboration. But the key thing that this particular collaboration will do is that it needs to operationalize and support the ASEAN carbon framework. So all the scope of collaboration, basically looking at in enhancing methodologies, working towards sharing of the sharing of the resources, as well as building capacity building, and also, of course, business collaboration. And these are really very brief through, and happy to take any questions because I know that I'm actually not part of the agenda, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's quite informative. And this, I think, even if it was not part of formally of the agenda, is part of the purpose of this type of workshops, where those initiatives that make sense in the context of the discussion are presented, discussed, and give the opportunity also to be elevated to other discussions. Questions from the room? I see two hands. Give him now Suhaini, and then
Just to follow up on what Dr. Winnie has shared, we are scheduling ASEAN carbon crediting system workshop during IGEN 9 October 2024. What Dr. Winnie has shared is basically on the discussion between players, the private sector players, but we also wanted to promote the discussion among ASEAN member states. So we will be extending the invitation. Hope we can basically realize this together through the workshop and start seeing whether see something within the G2G framework. So we really welcome, we will be sharing the invitation to the members. I know some of you, maybe not from the Ministry of Environment. I think we need to start the discussion on the G2G platform as well.
Thanks. Yeah, MFF plays a very critical role in this ASEAN Carbon Framework, representing, of course, the government sector. Thank you.
Wendy.
I
just have
Lisa-
sorry?
So there was a question here before, and then, or is a clarification or a comment on? Is it a question or it's a clarification or a?
Clarification from the,
Okay, please then the clarification first, and then back Wendy.
okay, yeah. I do have a clarification to NRES if they are represented here. Not sure whether NRES is represented here. I know they were here yesterday. Yes? Right, okay. Yes, yeah, hi. So just a quick clarification from NRES, because I know that NRES is in the process of formulating the national carbon market policy. And just as a follow-up to what Dr. Vaini was sharing, and basically the carbon market policy is to provide the strategic guidelines on any kind of carbon market initiatives, also including the voluntary carbon market. From what we understand currently, the emphasis is very much on the nature-based solution, including the FCO. Just wanted to know whether there's any kind of equal emphasis for also the tech-based carbon market? Because, you know, there is a lot of players in the market. I mean, coming out with a framework, I mean, we've seen it work in Thailand, in Indonesia. We do have projects in Indonesia, so which are tech-based. It gives a level of confidence for the project developers and also the users to actually develop the carbon market. And also, when I looked at Monica's slide, that a lot of the CORSIA-based projects, there is a lot of tech-based carbon credit project that actually contributed to CORSIA credits, you know. So just wanted some feedback on that.
Okay, thank you for the question. Okay, I would say that as a overview of this, we are currently doing our RUPIN, or we call it Act, Climate Change Act, and it's in progress. And also the carbon market policy as well. So it will interlink to that. And the policy would be more like more further explanation based on our act that stated on the on the carbon market, and also if you can see that it would be cover all of the under the carbon market itself. So as what I understand, our focus is more on the Article 6 under the Paris Agreement, but it also will cover we do have that guidelines on the VCM as well under the NRES. So if you can, it's in progress, and we are planning to finish by next year, hopefully by I think a second quarter or like that. And also there is a lot of overall picture or framework need to further understand on that, because we're having also in on the CCUS matters that need to be covered in our act, and also other specific detail on the carbon market itself. I think the CORSIA would be mentioned as well in the RUPIN, or I would say RUPIN is the Climate Change Act. So there is still in progress, but hopefully by next year you will get the whole of the act and also policy on the carbon market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pak Wendy, please.
First, we have to admit that we don't know very much about this issue regarding the ASEAN goal in this regard, because we are from the Directorate General of Civil Aviation and under the Ministry of Transport. So perhaps this our colleague from the Ministry of Environment involved in this more compared with us. Our question is that, like, when you envision the interoperable carbon market within ASEAN, you envision this look like a umbrella standard like the CORSIA, and then as an umbrella for other standard. If we can that mechanism, that's one my first question. And the second that just my wondering, like, it's look for me, it's look is to harmonize is okay. Having the ASEAN carbon market perhaps also is doable, but if we go to the ASEAN emission trading scheme, I think for me it's look like it's still a very long way to go. But I don't know, what is your opinion on this? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Park, for your questions. With regards to the interoperable carbon market, the way how we would see it in the most simplified manner would be every single country's exchanges will still hold autonomy on what they choose to trade. So for example, in Bursa Carbon Exchange, we trade gold standard and as well as Vera, and for REX, we use the IREC registry. So if, let's say, for example, Thailand's government, they allow us to actually trade TGO, their TIVA, then we will be able to actually access into the registry and start trading as well TIVA standards credits in our own domestic voluntary carbon market. Similarly, for example, for IDX, if IDX chose to accept FCO and Malaysian government allow these registries to be trade in IDX, then IDX can include the FCO's registry into the IDX for trading. That would be the simplest mode to operationalize at the voluntary carbon market space. Now, when you talk about the ASEAN ETS, I do agree with you. If we have one big ETS mechanism like the EU ETS, whereby they are trading on a single platform, that will take a very long time to reach agreement among all these 10 countries. So a much more practicable way, again, is that each compliance mechanism will accept registries of corresponding other countries' registry, but this time the only difference is that the host country will allow authorization of these credits to be traded in the recipient country's ETS mechanism. That would be the fastest way of doing interlinkages, but yet every country still holds certain sovereign rights over it. This is our, at a high level, but the end goal, of course, if we could have an ASEAN ETS single platform, that would be very, very efficient in terms of the transfer of credits and as well as being able to access and view what is actually being offered. And of course, hopefully, one day, of course, Malaysia will very soon have a CORSIA labeled products as well, because currently at the moment in our standardized contracts that are offered, we do not yet have any CORSIA label. But of course, all these labelings we see will be coming in, when there is a market demand for it.
Standard regarding the common market, but my first question actually addressed to the ASEAN ASEAN, what to call it, the ASEAN carbon standard that you mentioned. Is it, what do you envision that the ASEAN carbon standard? This is like CORSIA, as I mentioned, standard to like an umbrella for other standard to be able to use it.
Yeah, so we are not advocating that there is a single ASEAN standard. What we are advocating, what we recognize is that most likely most country would want to have their own local standard. Just like in Indonesia, you have your SRN, and then in Thailand, you have a TIVA, and then of course, Malaysia is coming up with our nature-based, the FCO, the forest carbon offset. And this is where we could harmonize our methodologies instead of trying to harmonize a standard, because a standard is always owned by the government. So if you have an ASEAN standard, I think it might be quite difficult to reach an agreement of who owns a standard. So better to let the government owns a standard, be responsible for it. But the way we can fast track is that if the methodologies can be open source, then it means that we can have this kind of shared methodologies. After all, geographically, we are very similar in terms of tech-based opportunities. Most of us are very fossil fuel. In Malaysia, 80% of our emissions come from the tech-based sector.
Additional questions from the room or from the virtual room?
So Dr. Waini, so if you say that you're trading each other's products, right, with the authorization of host government, but this is for voluntary market, so no issues regarding national authorizations and all that will come in, right? Okay. So if I was Malaysian company, I'm voluntarily buying Thai credits and using those for whatever domestic offsetting or whatever, but that stays in the Thai NDC, right?
Yes, you're right. But it is also because, for example, the TIVA belongs really to the Thai government. They would have to consent that we can actually trade the the credits from, it's just a trading part. But the NDC for Thailand under VCM remains completely intact. But even so, because the standard is owned by the government, so there would be a need to get a consensus that yes, you do allow your credits to be traded on our platform. or any other platform?
Okay. Must confess, this is for my aviation understanding, is really stretching my limits, but it's really, really, really interesting. So thanks a lot. Hopefully we'll continue the discussion as well.
Thank you.
So then continue with the agenda, and before going to the break, I understand the next one, it shouldn't take too long, so it can be, yeah, positive on that. Yeah, okay. You know, when Monica says it shouldn't take too long, you should put a bit of a caveat there. I will cut if it's getting too long. Yeah, right. So we are going into, yes. So we are then on the agenda item, specific application to nature-based carbon projects. Yeah. So I have very good news for you. This part has been integrated into the previous presentation from Sandeep, so it's already done. So we can go for the break, and that's the good news, I guess. Okay, so 15 minutes, and we resume quarter past the hour. So please.
Okay. For the excursion, if anyone interested, kindly sign as soon as possible so that we can send it to the tourism board.
Your excursion, who has not signed up, please sign up by now, by the coffee break, because we need to finalize the numbers.
Okay, welcome back. So we have the last modules for the day. So we will start with steps and elements of new methodologies development for projects, and then the readiness of nature-based and tech-based activities. We will have integrated, or we are integrating this with a discussion later, so we can wrap the last part of the workshop together. So Sandeep, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Santi. Okay. So I think in the previous session, Dr. Veni talked about the common infrastructure and arrangements and capacity building and interoperability, and one part of that was also methodologies which are amenable, which are applicable to the ASEAN context, given that there is a lot of similarities in here. So in this part of presentation, I'd like to touch upon what it takes to develop a new methodology and what we need to be conscious about, and subsequently touching upon the readiness of the removal activities, of how we see that coming from different programs and their associated methodologies in this very context. So if we look into a new methodology development as such, day one, we heard that it is not that easy. It is one that it is time consuming, a year or two at least. It costs a lot, can go to $1 million for development that is being cited. So what does it take to, what are the steps, what does it take, what are the key elements that we need to be conscious about, and whether through our internal resources itself, if the new methodology could be developed to ensure that this transaction cost could be brought down and we could benefit out of it. So in the context of carbon markets, the methodologies that are there, they are linked to a particular program. And earlier, these market methodologies were essentially coming from CDM. That was the go-to resource to even for the voluntary carbon market standards for the respective methodologies, which subsequently got enhanced with the other voluntary carbon market, or now the independent standards starting to develop their own methodology, which is not that they have done by themselves, but it's the project developer who kind of propose a new methodology to these standards. So there are two ways in which methodologies come into fore as approved methodology. One, which are given by the standard itself, the standard of the program itself, more as a top-down methodology. And the other set is bottom-up methodologies, wherein a project developer acknowledging that there is a mitigation activity, and the quantification of these emission reductions from this activity needs a credible process and approach, and for that they propose a certain approach as a methodology to the respective standard for approval. So this methodology kind of contains different elements. It talks about where this methodology is applicable, so the applicability conditions of that methodology. It talks about what are the sources and greenhouse gases which the methodology would be covering. It talks about the way the baseline scenario would be established. It talks about how the additionality would be established. It gives the way of how emission reductions would be computed, including the leakage part of it. And it also gives the monitoring approach that needs to be followed for ex post verification. So that's broadly what a methodology consists of. And some of the examples, if we were to see like from Vera, there is this methodology on improved agricultural land management. So by the term itself, we can get a glimpse into where this methodology is applicable and what type, and if we look deeper into it, then it gives into what all greenhouse gases it covers, what all interventions it covers. And it could be a broader set of or a consolidated methodology also. So it's not very specific at times, but it covers a broader set of activities, because when you talk about improved agricultural land management, there could be reference to how tillage is carried out, how fertilizer is being applied, how irrigation is being carried out. And also, so there could be different interventions which could still be addressed with the same methodology, and it could have reference to avoidance activities as well as removal activities in the type of activities together. So that is also there. So generally the methodologies cannot be clearly distinguished at times that this is avoidance methodology or it's a removal methodology, but it could be having both the elements as we see in this agricultural methodology. Or if we see the soil organic carbon methodology, which is a framework methodology, because there could be different modules which could be plugged in. So that is supposedly a removal kind of methodology, catering only on the soil part of it and how that can be enhanced. So these are just some examples of methodologies. Uh, Same for the biochar and its utilization for soil or non-soil application. So for biochar, which happens to be an interesting case and applicable case in the ASEAN context, biochar, when used in soil, could be seen as a removal activity, but when used for non-soil application as a fuel, probably it could be seen as an avoidance activity, like biochar usage in a induction furnace, replacing coal. That is a separate activity. So here, what we see and how it is linked to the CORSIA core carbon principles or criteria which are there. Broadly, they have been clustered into the governance side of it, which is looking more into the program as to how the program has been set up. But there is a piece on where the emissions get impacted, is where the methodology have a lot of bearing, as it talks about the additionality, permanence, as we said earlier, and the robust quantification of emission reductions, along with no double counting. So no double counting goes more in the direction of the registry and the project documentation side of it, but the methodology kind of ticks the boxes on additionality, permanence, and the robust quantification. Uh, 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 it could also touch upon the double counting part as well, with the monitoring aspect of whether the same project is being like from purely from the ownership perspective and not being considered separately as a separate project. So that also is there, but generally that doesn't get covered in the methodology development per se. uh, so if we were to develop a new methodology for a particular type of activity, be it a carbon capture storage kind of activity or a nature based project, even before going into directly jumping into the new methodology development, first we need to see what is already available, because there are a lot of methodologies which are already there in the different carbon programs which are out there, but we have to see that the carbon program where we want to develop the project, whether there is a methodology or not. So it's a two-way thing. Either we approach the program because we want to develop a project under that program from that side, or we look into the methodology, and since that methodology is in that program, so we are developing it under that program. So the both things need to fall in place before a project can be developed into a particular program. The standard itself and an approved methodology within that standard itself. In earlier times, it was easier because most of the programs, they were referring to CDM methodology. So you just take CDM methodology, develop it under Vera. You take a CDM methodology, develop it under Gold Standard. You take a CDM methodology, develop it under GCC. It was easy. But now, with CDM not being there and the set of methodologies which are already there under CDM, uh, they are still substantial, like 300, 400 methodologies are there. But it could be a case that especially if we talk about carbon capture and storage. So that was not there as a sectoral scope under CDM. It was limited to just the 15 sector. So this 16th sector, which is carbon capture and storage, was not there. So now carbon capture and storage, or for that matter, even agricultural activities, including soil organic carbon and all, these methodologies are not there under, because it was not covered under CDM. So there are no methodologies over there. So it could be a case that we are limited to looking to a particular standard or a program. And if we see that there is no methodology applicable, then we arrive at a point where a new methodology is to be developed. Then there are certain key principles that a methodology needs to adhere to, and there are certain other aspects the methodology should be considering. First of all, the methodology should be encompassing all the relevant greenhouse gases. In the previous session, we talked about leakage emissions. So there could be certain boundary setting which the methodology could talk about, not looking into other GHGs which are outside this boundary, but still how that part of greenhouse gases will be accounted is what the methodology need to be fair on and needs to be included. Second bit, that this methodology is uh, would give a same result for uh, the project types using this very methodology. So it should not result in a, like if I apply that same methodology, I give a result X, and somebody else applies the methodology, gets result Y. That should not be the case. So the methodology needs to give the same result. So from a interpretation point of view, it should be very clear. Uh, it should have a transparent presentation of how the emission reductions will be calculated with the corresponding data that are to be monitored, and that it can be clearly replicated by others. So it should not be a restrictive one in the sense that it's a black box. You put something in and the methodology will give you the result, and it's some sort of software which nobody can see or audit. So that's not the case. So methodology has to be clear in that part. It has to be consistently giving the same sort of results with the same data sets over the years, and not that over a period of time the results tend to vary. The accuracy is also important, which kind of links to some extent to the conservativeness side. So if for some reasons the accuracy is being like meeting the accuracy is not is expensive, then it would err on the conservative side. So on the one hand, the baseline emissions would be lowered. On the other hand, the project emissions and the leakage emissions would be taken on the higher side. And the focus is on the relevant greenhouse gases. So it's not that you will want to cover all the different aspects, all the smaller aspects, which will then make the methodology too heavy and too difficult to handle. Uh, it should rather give some bit of simplification, default options as well. So if a project proponent wants to go the extra mile, they can, but if not, there could be default options which could be there in the methodology inbuilt, which makes the life easier. And that also goes in the context of the additionality demonstration also. So many of the methodologies which have been there earlier, they give the options that okay, you prove your, if your project context is like this, like I'll give an example. If you're talking about a landfill gas project, and if there is no power generation happening from the landfill gas capture, and it is only flaring, then it could be taken as an automatic additional project. Even if there is a power plant being put up, but it is less than 5 megawatt, it could be considered as automatic additional. But if it goes beyond 5 megawatt, then you need to prove financial additionality. So these are some of the ways and means in which some sort of simplification, some sort of easy application of the methodology is inbuilt. That's on the additionality side. Same for the emission reduction calculation, that there could be default factors and approaches which could be provided rather than long equations and complex mathematics behind it. So that's where the user friendliness of the methodology also comes into play. So these are some of the elements that we need to keep in mind while developing a new methodology. In terms of the process per se, generally there's now agnostic to any particular standard or program. It's a bit generic way in which it has been presented. So the need for developing that methodology or new methodology is basically starts with this concept note where we look into what is available to us, and whether in that existing set of methodologies which are there, none are fitting, or there are certain elements in certain methodologies which we can use of, but they are not exactly clear fit to our particular project case. So that would then form the basis of why the methodology is to be developed. And it could also look into the apart from the technical aspect of it, it could look into the financial part of it also, that the emission reduction volume is substantial, and that calls for a methodology development for an approved methodology by a standard to have that quantified and get the credits coming out from it, which are of certain quantity, which makes sense financially to develop a new methodology. So once that note is done, using the specific standards template. So most of these standards, they have come out with particular template, because it's not a white paper that they give, okay, this is the white paper, you use it, put everything that you want for the methodology development. That is not the case. It has advanced a lot over the past 2 decades now. So these standards and programs have their own sort of templates for methodology development, wherein they seek information on certain specific aspects, as I said, applicability conditions, uh, project boundary setting, baseline scenario, additionality demonstration, emission reduction calculations, monitoring aspects, any other aspects and all. So all these part is what needs to be populated and then submitted to the standard, with or without a real case behind it. If it is with a real case, it eases the assessment of the methodology. So, eh, but before even going into the detailed development of that methodology and all that bit, uh, just to have a quick sense whether the standard even approves such a project type and associated methodology could be a step as a precursor, wherein this concept note could be shared with the standard that we want to develop such and such methodology for such type of project activities. And the standard could say that yes, it is something which is approved under our project sectoral scope and type of activities, and in principle they could give the go ahead. This is not something which is there as part of the process per se, but it could be a good to have kind of thing. And then once we have some sort of green light, or in principle approval, then we invest more efforts into developing the full-fledged methodology, which will have to go through public consultation and assessment by a third party for quality check. And as part of the development itself, we might want to have an internal quality check also, because a methodology could be like a 20, 30, or even 100-page document at times. So there could be inconsistencies which uh, the developer who is so engrossed in the methodology development might get lost in the woods. From a quality check perspective, there could be this consistency checks and other aspects, more from an eagle eye view or an airplane view, that could come in, which can improve the quality of the methodology. So then it goes for public consultation, third party audit and assessment by them, where in they could be back and forth, corrective actions, clarification requests before it is submitted to the standard. So the standard again reviews it, because they have either their internal or external reviewers for doing that. And this whole process generally takes more than a year or so. If you can move fast, you can get it within a year, but generally takes about 2 years or so. In case of CDM, this experience was like it used to take about 2-3 years before a methodology gets approved. So some of the newer methodologies which are in the process, both on the tech space and the nature based space, very recently which have been developed, is on the soil organic carbon, the framework methodology under gold standard, or the biochar methodology under vera, and the carbon capture storage methodologies, and both under vera and gold standard are in advanced stage of development, including a few on coal decommissioning and many others. So there we need to keep an eye on the newer methodologies which are getting developed as well, to see that there's no duplication happening, and if we can rely on something which is already in the pipeline. So that's on the process side of it. uh, More contextually, in terms of the methodology, in terms of the baseline setting, since we have been talking about baseline, and how baseline has the definition of baseline has kind of changed from what was there pre 2020, post 2020, is important. So the baselines is which is kind of project specific, location specific, uh, but the broader contours of that are what need to be defined. In the pre-2020 regime, there were three approaches which were generally kind of seen. One, looking into the historical data to form the baseline. The other was looking into the common practice and the top five initiative, and using that as a basis. And the same, the third was on uh, on uh, on similar lines, but still kind of looking into the historic data, and the baseline being below business as usual. That was the approach which was there. Now Yeah. So the pre-2020, it was historical emissions, the technology which was more economically attractive and accounting for the barriers or investment, and the top 20%. So this is what was there as a pre-2020 baseline setting approach across the methodologies. Now, even the newer methodologies which are being developed or have been developed under other independent standards, the concept of this below business as usual, or if we see in this post 2020 baseline setting approach, what we still see those three approaches which were there, although it's not the same order. But if you see this existing actual or historical emission here, 48A, and we see the third option here, an approach based on existing actual or historical emissions adjusted downwards. So this is the additional element, below business as usual. In short, that is what is happening. If we look into the technology part of it, best what was there earlier in terms of emissions from a technology representing economically attractive course of action, that has got changed to best available technology that represents a economically feasible blah blah blah. So there is a shift between the the three set of approaches which were there pre 2020 or under the Kyoto Protocol to Paris Agreement, where this has been uh, brought down further. Same goes for the benchmark approach, where it is linked to the best performing comparable activity. So this all would mean uh, now till 2025 there is a possibility to still continue to use the CDM methodologies, but post 2025 all the projects which are there, they'll have to update the methodologies, whether the renewal is due or not still. So that essentially means is with this particular baseline methodology setting approach, that same projects will tend to deliver less and less credits as we go forward. How this would be reflected is something which is to be seen. Now, if I give an example, a simpler one, in the earlier days for renewable energy projects, you put up a 10 megawatt project. It is linked, a renewable energy project. It is linked to the grid emission factor, the electricity grid emission factor. And that grid emission factor is say fixed at say like 0.8 ton CO2 per megawatt hour. So that is kind of fixed for like 7 years or 10 years. Now, with this sort of approach, it could be that you are required to update that factor year on year, or that factor is instead of 0.8, it is taken as 0.5 or zero point 0.6 with some logic obviously behind it. So that essentially means that same 10 megawatt project will give you lesser number of credits, because though the electricity generation would remain same, but this factor which is plugged in, which is a representative of the baseline or below business as usual, has gone down. So in case of so that's on the baseline estimation part with a tech based RE project. In case of a nature based project, the things become even more challenging and complex, because there are a lot of factors which are interplaying out there. So there is a lot of information which is required to kind of fulfill the the baseline setting approach which are cited under the Paris Agreement. So I'll not go into the details of this, because this is more on the nature based side. Probably it would become too dry, but just wanted to highlight that it is going to be bit complex for quantification of emission reductions from a nature-based project. That's one part of the story. Apart from the delivery side of it, which is also like from the uptake and how fast the emission reductions could be delivered from such projects. The other part is on the additionality side of it, and what we see it in under Paris Agreement can be covered under the environmental integrity of it. Uh, so here earlier there was some bit of discussion and thought that since corresponding adjustment is being carried out, so why there is a need for additionality demonstration for for an Article 6 activity, or where or where these projects are being used for NDC compliance. But if we see it from the perspective of from CORSIA, the story is different, because the CORSIA usage is for the offsetting purpose, and even though this is using the corresponding adjustment part, given the voluntary nature of the NDCs, anyway in the normal course, uh, do not over flood the market with the emission reductions and the credits associated with them. Rather, it's only the focus goes on the projects which would not have happened otherwise. So that's the underlying thing behind, among one of the things behind the environmental integrity part of the project, apart from it being touching on the permanent side, the reversal side as well, and the baselines being more conservative. So I think that's about it. I will not want to go too much detail into new methodology development, but happy to take questions um, over tea or coffee to detail discussion on other aspects of methodology development. I'll take a pause for now. If there are any questions specific to methodology development, or there are any specific examples or queries that you would want to kind of pose more related to methodology development, when we could deliberate on that.
Maybe Sandeep, if we have participants within the meeting room who are looking at developing new methodologies, maybe they can share the experience. If they can say, you said to have a new methodology approved, it takes, taking the example of the CDM, around 3 years. And again, what is the experience of here for the participants in the meeting room, if there is any looking at new methodologies for some specific projects, maybe good to share their impression, their challenges, specific, and applying maybe to some standards which were eligible for the pilot phase. Again, we don't know what it will happen after, but before going to the CORSIA, if there is any.
So first Junard, then Munchin, and then Timor-Leste. Joachim.
Yeah, thank you, Sandeep. So with regard to new methodologies, for example, a project has been ongoing and the proper governance has been done, but the methodology for that was only initiated, say, a year after it started, and the approval after 2 years. So will the 3 years that passed by still be considered in the process?
So this a very program specific. Some programs give more retroactive period for projects wherein a new methodology is being developed. Unlike So because you cannot do the quantification in the absence of the methodology. So if the two, you have put up a project which is the real case, which is where the methodology is also needed. And generally, if we see it from Vera perspective, Vera says that once your project has started, which defines your project start date, you need to get it listed within a year's time frame, right? You need to get the project listed. Now there is no methodology for that. So you can get your project listed, but there is no methodology. So you are proposing a new methodology, and with that new methodology, because that new methodology development itself would take year or two or more, so that kind of retroactive period is allowed for you. So even though your project is operational for 3 years, but you would still be allowed. So there is, like, I think 3 year, or depending upon when the methodology gets approved, then you have some years which you can still go back to. So that is defined from the program specific procedures in terms of how they define the start date and what sort of retroactive period they allow you to take. Under gold standard, the start date definitions are linked to when you started your activity and not from when you got it commissioned. So that's some sort of differences. But there also there is this provision on retroactive registration.
Just a quick confirmation. You said just now that the time frame it takes to develop the methodology could be up to 2 years, no? Okay, and then I guess it's related to TGO. For TIVA Plus, you have 12 methodologies. Like, how did that process go? Like, how did you get to 12? Was it already there? You adopted it from another standard, or these are newly developed?
From what I understand, it's like we have like different sectors of industries and activities or projects. So maybe waste management, transport, and energy efficiency. Each is like 2 or 3 methodologies, and our technical experts, like from environmental engineers or scientists, like adopt from international standards, but like mix and apply. I think international organization and board universities as well.
Just asking whether the research in the Thai context came from universities.
Yeah, we have collaboration with the Kasetsart University, like the major agricultural focused public universities, and also from other international organizations.
If I could just continue on the question from Manching, how long did it take for you all to develop these methodologies? And what about the VVBs in terms of the validation and the verification? Do you have any issue finding expertise in these areas to, at the early days, maybe it's even before your days?
Yes, actually, Dr. Vavina would be the person who answer. But I think it's not very fast process, because from what I have engaged, we still are developing some methodologies for measure MRV for some let's say some specific trees and some specific projects and activities. We just have some outsource contracts with the universities, and I think it's take times, maybe years, but I don't have specific numbers. Yeah, but I think you have to take time and preparations for develop your own methodologies, even you have based on other standards.
So I think I'll also try to share some experiences in terms of different standards and development of methodology in that. So just recalling old days, 2006, 2007, developing a CDM methodology. So I was fortunately part of development of methodology for some industrial sector activities, fertilizer industry. So it took about a year under CDM those days. Same for another activity type in terms of the fugitive emissions from a process industry, basically shifting toward new process. But coming to 2011, 2012, for a different type of activity, for a construction sector activity, it took almost 1.5, 2 years back and forth for developing a methodology. Under Vera, it took almost since that was an ongoing process. So it took almost 2 years for developing a methodology. It had to go through an auditing process before it is being approved. Under gold standard, there was some process of developing methodology, but it got stalled in midway for different reasons. So that's also what is there. So as a reviewer, if I were to comment, uh, the comments which are sent from the reviewer from the standard to the methodology, the project developer generally are not able to revert back timely. So that's where the long time period also comes into play in terms of delaying the whole thing. So if you are active enough, you can get the methodology developed within a year time frame as well, because the processes are well defined, that okay, you need to do step 1, step 2, step 3, you need to do public consultation for a certain period of time, you need to get a third party validation done. So if you're progressive on that, you can very well do it in a year's time frame as well. But if any of these steps are kind of delayed, then the whole process also gets delayed.
So a question from Timor Leste.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Actually, I have the same questions regarding the timeline. Referring to the Guyana and Thailand carbon credit project, I was expecting that in your presentation you can show us at least just a general timeline for each steps for the methodology development. But I think you already mentioned something about it in the previous questions. But if there is any, then probably that's going to be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so the different standards have their own process, but broadly the way, like if we talk about Vera, earlier they had a dual VVB sort of assessment when they did not have their capacity. So when a new methodology is developed, it is given to VVB for assessment, and the back and forth between them happens. Then it goes to the program, and then the second set of VVB comes into play, which kind of reassesses it. So it like a 4I principle kind of thing comes into play, which now this before the methodology is approved. They have changed some bit of that process now, with possibly also coming from CORSIA as a requirement, need to make that whole process robust enough to have high quality methodologies also in place. Because if the methodology itself is not robust, then obviously it would not result in high integrity credit. So now the process is that they have a public consultation for the methodology also. So once the methodology is made public, that this is the new methodology which is under the process, then anybody in the world can say and comment on that methodology, and the relevant part of those comments will have to be addressed by the developer before it is kind of reassessed by the auditor, and subsequently by the expert reviewer from the from the standards end. So that's another layer of review which happens. So same as in the case of gold standard. So gold standard, you can propose a new methodology to gold standard. It is given to multiple expert reviewers. So it's not that I have some adverse feeling, so I would want to comment too much on your methodology, but it is through a set of reviewers which wherein the comments are consolidated and then given back to you that these are concerns with related to the methodology and you need to address them. So it could be a back and forth, it could run into 2-3 rounds, and how fast you are able to communicate on that is where the timelines then tend to get defined eventually. So purely from a process perspective, if you want to understand, generally the consultation period is for a month or two, and then this whole auditing process of that methodology uh, could be done, or the expert review comments addressal could be done in a month or two time frame if you are prompt enough. But the part which is prior to it, wherein you are drafting that methodology, is also important, because that could be a bigger part of the whole story in terms of understanding what is the overall expanse. And if I were to link it to the previous question of the 12 methodologies which are there in the premium TIVA scheme, there is a pool of methodologies already out there coming from CDM, from Vera, from Gold Standard, and many other standards as well, programs as well. And if elements from those methodologies are taken, customized to the relevant country context, in this case Thai context, then you are good to go. You are in an expedited mode in terms of having methodologies approved which are customized to the particular context. And since that is a top down approach, it is faster. So that's where you have all of a sudden 12 methodologies out there now. So as I said, that there is a top down approach wherein the standard comes up with the methodology, and the bottom up approach where project developers propose a new methodology. And this is the timeline that we were talking about, that it could be a year or two depending on how fast you can move around developing the new methodology.
So that means that it's should be more than 2 years, approximately.
Let's take 1 year.
Let's say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions from the room? From the virtual room? Didn't see any. Okay. There are some questions that are related, not necessarily to the methodologies, but more generic on CORSIA and the implementation of CORSIA. I think we can take them kind of a closing as part of the closing of the day. Now I propose we move on to the next agenda item, which is the readiness of nature-based and tech-based activities, and obviously in the context of CORSIA implementation. So please, Sandeep.
Yeah, thank you. So now moving forward from the methodologies to activities, and given that there is a lot of emphasis as is being seen, be it in the exchange or the premium program on nature-based project, and there's a lot of talks in terms of the tech-based activities. Again, from a removal perspective, what I would want to kind of cover and show, linking to the previous presentation, is how this whole taxonomy is seen and understood, and how we can then look about into different type of activities as well, and where do we stand with regards to such type of activities happening in the region. So broadly, if we look into the removal activities, they can be, now there are different ways in which can be arranged, but one of the way in which this arrangement is reflected is the biological one, and the second is the geochemical or the chemical method. So essentially nature based and tech based in different wordings. In the biological one, It could be land-based, ocean-based, or the blue carbon as the case of mangroves. The tech-based or the geochemical or chemical one could have this direct air capture or this biomass energy storage or biochar. So there's some bit of overlap if you see it from the nature or tech-based, but this bit of approach kind of puts the biochar into the geochemical or the chemical method, because that's how it is, and the enhanced weathering sort of activities. So in case of land-based, we have the afforestation, reforestation, the improved forest management, and the agricultural management activities more on the soil organic carbon increase side of it. So that's on the removal type of methods that are there. Uh, but not just the removal part, the it is also to be seen in perspective of how this removal is being stored. So the from a storage part of the story, it looks into the either it's in the ecosystem, or it is in geological reserves, or it is in some sort of durable product, and there again the differentiation is that it could be a land based or ocean based or marine, with above ground, below ground, deadwood or soil organic carbon. And in the storage part of the story, it could be either the biomass products or the inert carbon products, as in case of concrete and other aggregates which could be produced using the carbon dioxide which is captured. So that's on the taxonomy side of it, which if we uh, look into how this is eventually implemented, and what we see in the in some of the carbon programs, and their respective status right now with the pilot phase and the first phase, we'll try to look into what are the methodologies which are there in these respective programs that could be of interest. Uh, One, from seeing it from the perspective that if there is already an approved methodology, then possibly in the regional context there could be activities which could be done in the region where credits could emerge, or projects or type of activities wherein the methodologies are in the process of development. We could seek some sort of credits emerging from that as well. So from the taxonomy side, if we were to bring it down to the project side of clustering, with the removal projects being distinguished in the form of a nature-based removal or the technology-based removal, then we have a distinction in terms of afforestation, reforestation project, or improved forest management, or the agricultural land management with the soil organic carbon increase, or blue carbon. And on the tech side, we have direct air carbon capture, biomass carbon storage, or carbon capture utilization and storage, biochar, enhanced weathering, and ocean storage, and the likes. So for these different type of removal activities, there are already certain set of methodologies which are already there in the different carbon programs. And we talked about permanence aspect in the previous presentation, how the permanence part of the story is being observed in those very methodologies as well. So that's what I like to present with some of the standards. So some of these standards with their specific regional focus may not be directly relevant from the geographical context here, but still since these are methodologies out there, if the customization or the in the regional context were to be done, these could as well be the feeding grounds which could be seen in case we see some sort of activities happening with such type of projects happening in the region. So broad clusterization, nature based, tech based, ARR or IFM project. For that we have projects in under Vera, also similar sort of methodologies, um, and same for the blue carbon, basically the wetlands, mangroves and all. And in these methodologies, most of these are here, they are approved under ACR. Similar sort of approved methodologies we also see under Vera. The thing is that with regards to the permanence method, what we see here is that the standard has this risk tool, which kind of determines what the buffer contribution would be and whether it would be with or without the complemented insurance product or not. So that is what is of interest to see that there are ready available tools or tools which have acceptability already in the market. Now, since ACR and ART happen to be the approved programs under the first phase, we could as well see that these elements are something which are already approved. And if we were to develop a new methodology, or in our context, given that there's more of the from the geographical context, like the presentation that we had in December, wherein we looked into the type of activities happening in the region, and we found out that here the geographical focus is more US oriented, and that very region. So it may not have the same reflection in our ASEAN context. So we might still want to use certain elements of these methodology and probably develop it under the scheme of things or the programs which are eligible here, and use some such approved tools and elements while developing the new methodology, and not as kind of reinventing the whole wheel. So that's on the nature based side of it. On the technology side of it, there is also a methodology on removal on carbon capture and storage projects, but this is still under the review stage. It is not yet approved. And here we see a direct reference to a 10% direct buffer contribution, along with or without the eligible insurance product. So that's also an interesting thing or a feeler to get as to what these buffer amount could likely be, or what is kind of being talked about and accepted. If we look into the another sort of standard, here the story slightly changes, that here instead of the ton accounting, there is the ton year accounting, which is like, okay, you are sure for like say 10 years, 15, 20 years, but not for the entire 100-year period. So you would have some bit of discounting happening from that part of the story. So like, it's, if we say that 100-year is what I look at, and you only provide me for 20 years, then probably a 1/5 sort of approach, very simplistically putting, but that's not how it is done, but just for ease of understanding. So that's the ton year accounting, wherein the emission reduction and the year part of it story gets both captured in. And here what we see in case of other nature based project, the contribution under the reverse risk buffer pool as 6%, or as a ton year accounting. So if you have a ton year accounting, then the need for a buffer pool kind of doesn't appear, because it is very limited to that particular year. In case of a biochar methodology, which are approved in a car, here they talk about the 100-year permanence. So these are the timing and the percentages that we need to be aware of while if we were to develop a new methodology or use certain such elements. If we look into GCC, most of the, except for this DAX, the BEX methodology, which is on the technology side of it, which is approved, here they have a buffer contribution indicated of 5%, and this is approved methodology. But from from a first phase of CORSIA perspective, we'll have to see what and if there are any changes which are appearing in this, given that there are like different buffer contributions being observed under different standards. The other methodologies which are there on the nature-based side of it here are under development. So, but they still talk about the same buffer pool approach for the permanence side of activity, be it on the wetlands or the other lands except wetlands. So it kind of covers all land types with that. Then in context of gold standard, again here there are some limited set of methodologies on soil organic carbon, on afforestation, reforestation, on mangroves, on the nature side of it. All these methodologies are approved, and they talk about the reversal risk. But here the buffer contribution is 20%. So what we see that if and whether there is some sort of harmonization which kind of happens on this, and if that happens, then it will have an impact on the credit availability from the project types. But on the tech side of it, the two methodologies which are approved, one on the geological storage and the other on the usage part from the carbon capture usage thing. Whereas for the geological storage, they talk about the 2.5% of the credits or based on the risk assessment. In case of the concrete aggregate, there is the permanence risk is not there because it's already inbuilt into the methodology. So coming to VCS, which has a fairly long list of methodologies, but if we just look into the tech-based of project here, in case of the the carbon capture and storage part of it, again the risk reversal tool, reversal risk tool is what gets applied. For the biochar part, so permanence is already considered within the methodology in terms of how much the CO2 is sequestered, whether it is for soil or non-soil application. And the CCUS methodology is still under development, so we cannot comment on that. It's in the process. But on the nature-based side, here again whereas there it was the sequestration reversal risk tool. In case of nature-based project, they have the AFOLU reversal risk tool. So different tools for different type of project activity, and same approach of buffer contribution is what is applied for these VCS project. So I think that that's all about in terms of the different sort of activities: ARR, IFM, ALM, mangroves, and then DAX and CCS, CCUS, so biochar. So these are the type of activities which are happening and which are being talked about in the removal space right now. Most of these methodologies that we see are pretty broad enough to cover different type of nature-based project, because they are already some sort of a consolidated methodology to an extent. So the newer set of methodology as we see, which are getting developed, are more on the tech-based CCS side of it, wherein the development is still undergoing. Social carbon, same sort of approach. They have their own tool, but since this is only in the pilot phase. So I think with limited projects or no projects here in this region, I think we could skip on this part. So I think that's about it, and to address any questions which are related to this part of the story.
So questions from the room, from the virtual room? That's where we are down to the different nature-based or tech-based solutions and their readiness.
This was heavy.
That was heavy, maybe.
Sandeep, I just want to break the ice because how to link this presentation with the new methodologies with what the representative from Bursa Malaysia mentions. He said, we need to diversify our portfolio. So we need to have a kind of short-term target with waiting that this program will be approved. So let's assume that the gold standard, the Verra, premium TVER will pass through all the screening and will be eligible for the first phase. So in case there are some techno-based projects here, which are already in contact, by the way, with Verra, and maybe they are developing new methodology, as you said. Actually, something is already there. It's only a matter to frame the geographical context. If I want to take something from CAR, frame within the context of ASEAN region, because it's mainly from Latin America, it's mainly from the US. So how I can manage to frame this specific geographical context of the Latin American, of the US within the CR, within the specific context of the ASEAN region, to diversify the portfolio and create more opportunities. Maybe, again, not immediately for the very short period, but because we know the time needed, but for the second, for the mandatory phase to be ready with this tech-based new methodology.
So there are like two things to it. One, that you would not develop a methodology if there is nothing happening in the region. So there has to be a real case which is already there, which is of interest, and why you want to develop a methodology in the first place. So a project type or an activity type where the methodology is still there, but still I think since that is of relevance and that has been talked a bit as well. We talk about rice cultivation, methane release from rice cultivation. Everybody knows. There is even methodology which has been there under CDM. There is methodology which is there under gold standard as well. Now that is there. One is that we use that methodology as is, with some caveat, because that methodology is at the global level. It is not talking about a particular geographical region and not talking about the region specific considerations or aspects. Like here, there could be every 2 seasons or 3 seasons for rice cultivation, the methane emission factor might be higher or lower or so. So very recently, there were these rice projects from China which were rejected. They were registered under Vera, and earlier they were stalled, like no issuances would happen, and subsequently these projects have been rejected altogether. So that is like a very new thing happening in the voluntary carbon market space, wherein these projects are being rejected now. So coming back to the methodological part, the methodology which is there, which is a generic methodology, whether the country specific or the region context specific factors could be built into that methodology so that it is easier to apply and get crediting from, because earlier the CDM methodology has been there for long, but there are hardly any projects which have been developed under CDM or under voluntary standard using the CDM methodology either. But with the gold standard, now they have come up with this methodology where actually they have already given certain default factors. So it's a good thing that we already have something top down which has come to us, which we can make use of. Now that was a specific case. If we talk about the waste sector for that matter, which is also important, where there is a lot of activity which needs to happen in the developing country context. I recall that in case of Thailand, the under the TIVA scheme, for the waste sector methodology, the CDM methodology is already there, but the region specific factors have been plugged into that methodology to make it even simpler. So some sort of standardization in terms of baseline, in terms of additionality demonstration, which could be plugged into the existing set of methodologies to make it more easy to apply for the project developer and to have faster issuances eventually coming from that project without default happening.
Please, or something.
Question for TGO again about the premium TIVA. You have about, I think, 14 methodologies under the premium TIVA. Are any of these methodologies dormant methodology from CDM or VERA that you've adopted? Meaning to say that these methodologies are no longer activated in the independent standards, and you activate it under the premium TIVA.
Yeah, we have 12 methodologies. For agriculture, we have 1. Transportation, we have 1. But forestry and green space, we have 5 methodologies, the most. Waste management, 2, and 3 for renewable energy. I think Dr. Pavina mentioned in the morning session that we developed from the CDM once the CDM has been superseded by the Paris Agreement. But I think it's like we adopt the basis of the methodology of CDM, and we add up elements, the transparency, the public participation elements into the premium TIVA. But the details of each methodology for each sector, I think we can follow up, we can contact after this workshop if you have specific sector in mind. Yeah, but basically we develop from the CDM. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we can take the questions that are remaining in Slido as a kind of a starting of the wrap up of the day. May I ask Alberto or? Yeah. Sorry, going myself to the Slido. So there is one, or maybe starting with the one for TIVER. I think there is, so I think you more or less, or you have a specific slide addressing that one, maybe just a refresher. Maybe the person was not at the moment in the call or following the details of the details. But it's basically what were the key issues identified by ICAO to clarify for premium TIVER, and what, when are they expected to hear, or when are you expected to hear? I think again you gave kind of this reply, but maybe it's also good to bring into context now.
Yeah, for the quick response, there are many issues, but the 5 major one would be the first issues would be the long-term scheme development framework. It's like not only the short-term or medium-term. The CORSIA would like to know details of the long-term development of the framework of the scheme, especially about the certification process, the carbon credits management and the revision of project proposal documents. We call it PPD, but in other jurisdiction, maybe you can call it other, but it's like project proposals in general. The second is like the format and data collection from different stakeholders, and how we would the disclosure, the information disclosure, how would you disclose it to the public, and which format that would be disclosed to the public and other different stakeholders. The third issue would be the process of improving the baseline scenario, the procedures and calculation of the emissions reductions, and the MRV, the monitoring report and verification. And the fourth is like the buffer credit management and in compliance with ICAO standards, because they would like to know how you manage your buffer credit management, because in each project you will not deliver all of the credits that generated from the project. You have to have some like reserve, some buffer credits, and the detail of the management of buffer credits. And the fifth one is like the mechanism to avoid the double counting, avoid double claiming. These are 5 measures, but there are many other details. But I think it's different from the case by case basis. If you other scheme, CORSIA maybe would like to know more about other issues, and expect date of approval maybe this ICAO Council meeting in Montreal in November this year. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. So then moving on to another question that was pending. There is one that I must confess I'm not entirely getting the question. So also the person, if it's in the room or in the virtual room, please raise your virtual hand and then we enable the mic. So the question reads, ICAO's CORSIA should be the single global market-based measure for reducing international aviation emissions. I understand it's some sort of a statement saying, acknowledging that this should be the only one. Maybe we can just comment unless the person wants to clarify what was behind this statement or if it was intended to be a question. Maybe seeking the views from the experts. And then
if we can clarify, is CORSIA is the only global market, so that's to differentiate what can be a regional approach to what can be a global approach as one of the mitigation measures, but that is a global market-based approach. So it is one of the measures that the state has to decarbonize the aviation sector. It is an out-of-sector measure and it applies globally. Does not have any specific regional characteristics. So it applies to all the states. And again, how then is designed? Is design in phase? Is design in a voluntary approach until 2016 and then mandatory based on some specific requirement in terms of aviation, such economic criteria, but that's the only global market-based measure to differentiate with what is happening with other regional context, targeting aviation. I think that is single is the only, just to stress.
thank you very much. And then the last 3 questions, if I remember well, are the ones that we flagged for tomorrow's continuation with Nachetas. I think those were the context of Nacheta's presentation. I see there is an additional one, seems to be also starting with Did Guyana, so I understand that could also be relevant for tomorrow. So maybe we hold it, we keep it in the list, and we address it tomorrow with Nachetas. Okay. Additional questions from the room. So then I think we've earned an early closure of the day. Then today was difficult. I must recognize for aviation people, and I put myself in the aviation people group. It was difficult to follow some of the conversations, and especially when it goes to market or to a specific application of methodologies. But this exercise, of course, is not meant to be or to convert the aviation people into experts in the field. I mean, we have the experts already, so we don't need to gain that expertise at that level. But I think it's meant to get an understanding and a feeling of what is on the other side when we are talking about projects, programs, and all these things, and what are the necessary dialogues that we need to facilitate with our counterparts in either other departments in the government, and or even when we communicate also to our industry. So this is understanding the system, or at least the basics of the system, will help us to make, let's say, the proper communication to engage those other parties into our cause. That is facilitating the implementation of CORSIA, and hopefully coming from credits that are retaining the environmental benefits in our countries. So as I mentioned before, I think the ASEAN Secretariat, also more, please.
Probably in the same region.
And thank you, Sandy. Just want to share that we just received the report from the Boeing about the Southeast Asia aviation fuel feedstock study report, which is very interesting. So I will send this full report and the executive summary to their chair, and their chair will circulate to all the participants by email. This study is conducted by the RSB and commissioned by Boeing and Standard Chartered, and we will circulate to all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, that's very relevant in the context of sustainable aviation fuels and what relates to implementation of CORSIA as CORSIA eligible fuels. So that is also one of the elements for offsetting. Okay, so then see you tomorrow 9 a.m. Enjoy Kota Kinabalu's evening. So I'm sure you will end up in a fish place or in a seafood place, as we will. So enjoy.